Hello, my love, and welcome back. Today I am here again with Tiffany, and we are going to be chatting a lot about the kind of different generations and things we've been seeing and feeling coming up regarding healing processes and different belief systems and programming that has played out. Lots to do with like Gen Z, millennials, boomers, and I'm actually going to send it to Tiffany right away first because this is something that you tend to reflect and see different parts of the collective consciousness and collective energies going on. And you've had multiple people in the last week kind of come forward expressing similar themes and patterns. So maybe we can start with that, and then you can see where you relate as a viewer and like what you've maybe been experiencing, and then we'll dive in and navigate from there.
Yeah, sounds good. Hi again. My name is Tiffany Calhoun. I am the owner of Sacred Vitality Healing. We do deep transformational work to help you overcome programs, limiting beliefs, and all of these sticky things that you grew up with that are affecting who you are now. So I do that through a variety of modalities such as breathwork, Reiki, retreats, and that's how Kara and I met. So coming full circle on that, the energy that is really coming up strong right now, and I think it's coming into my field because it's the work that I do. Um, I am a Scorpio. I have my sun conjunct Saturn in my fourth house of family. My karmic energy is tied to that programming that our parents, our ancestors instilled in our cellular memory and our bodies, and how that is playing out and how we can overcome that. So just in the past week, Kara mentioned I've had several friends and clients reaching out to me about situations that they're getting involved in with their parents, really hard conversations with this 1957 and prior generation of boomers. And when Kara was talking to me about what was coming up in her field, I was like, wait, time. Because this
Um,
is this is happening like
mhm.
across the board. Um, so we grew up, as 90s kids, maybe a little bit into the early 2000s, but like the most of our childhood was in the 90s, and our parents were young. Like they were in their 20s and early 30s when they had us. And we all know like your amygdala doesn't fully form until you're 27 years old. We all know Saturn return at 30 shifts who you are completely. And the majority of our years that we were raised were like prior to that happening for our parents. Like my mom had my brother when she was 21. She had me when she was 26. You know, you
Wow,
already
that's so young.
I know. Well, this was the 70s.
Yeah.
And I was born in 83.
Mm,
Um, So, the majority of uh like you're in like the fog as a parent. I can speak to this because I am one. It's very hard until your youngest is crossing these like major milestones of independence. 5 being one, 10 being another one. And if you think about like where that was in my mom's life and a lot of the boomers, it was in their early, mid, or even early to mid 20s, or even up until their early 30s. And um, it makes sense. Like you're just not emotionally mature enough. You're not emotionally available enough. You're in like a survival mode. You're going psychologically speaking, you have narcissistic tendencies until you're 27. It's a mode of survival. And
mm,
it's to keep children alive. Like they're supposed to think the world revolves around them.
mhm,
If they don't, if they become altruistic, how can they guarantee their survival and the survival of the, humankind a generation forward, right?
mm,
So these are all really foundational parts of our brain chemistry and our brain development. But when you add children to that in an earlier stage, and you're just not emotionally available or mature enough, you tend to push tough conversations onto your kids too early. And a lot of millennials, um, they knew exactly how their parents were doing financially, the stress of their parents' finances. They oftentimes were triangulated against each other when their parents were fighting, or especially in divorce. Like divorce started to rise a lot in the 90s. Um, and, all of these opportunities that our parents had to be mature parents were oftentimes self centered in that whole survival mode,
Mm.
scarcity mindset, all these root chakra issues.
Yeah.
And that's deep ancestral traumas that they brought into our youth, right?
Yeah, just like got passed down because even as I was going through stuff this week and I was doing some quantum healing around it and everything, and really looking at, yeah, like the wounds that my mom passed on to me were just like her inner child not having the nurture and safety and care from her mom, and like that lineage and just the way that these things continued. And the safety, as you mentioned, I feel like that's so big because if people don't create safety within themselves and they haven't been taught how to do that in a healthy way, then it's really hard for them to do that for the next generation,
Mhm.
because it's like if you're barely staying afloat and you're, you know, rocky on this thing, and then now you're raising a child, like now you're all just
Yeah.
rocking together and like fumbling all over the place. And especially for children who are so open and absorbing everything, and then double time for those who are like very empathetic and
Mhm.
energetically in tune. Like, we'll get into it more, but I know for me, I was just like, I know I was picking up on so much more than like my parents even realized. And so much of it happened unconsciously, obviously, on their end, but I was just like absorbing so many things that then I was holding and trying to process or,
Trying to
yeah,
fix.
trying to fix.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, so much there. Like I know for a fact, like the work that we are have to do now to like clear this from our bodies. Like many millennials have spent years and years in therapy,
Yeah.
the issues, but like you can't talk your way out of these wounds. These are ancestral, they're energetic, they're deep subconscious
Yeah.
traumas that got implanted into you. And there's a thing I like to talk about when I'm deep in the work with my clients during breathwork, especially. You existed inside of your grandmother's womb when
Mm,
your mom was in there. So like when your grandmother was pregnant with your mother
mm,
and she was, after 20 weeks of development, her ovaries had all the eggs that she would ever have in her lifetime. And one
yeah.
of those developed into you and your brother. And
Mm,
so, like, every 2 minutes, you're making 2 million red blood cells, which then go to differentiate into different muscle mass and bone and all of that stuff. So, the memory is there and the frequency is there. And the only way that you can really overcome this is to have these deep subconscious clearings, these quantum energy clearings, plant medicine work, because otherwise, you talk yourself into circles for years and
yeah.
years.
Yeah, or the somatic release too, right? Like as you mentioned, it can be energetic or deeply held in the body. Like I know this week I had extra tension and stuff coming up in my body and in muscles and like fascia, and you and I both have talked about like the fascial release, and that's definitely a place where I store so much trauma. and and it's like it's that whole the body keeps the score kind of vibe of
Mhm.
like, yeah, I could sit and talk about it all day, every day for years, but that doesn't actually change anything if I'm not clearing out where the tension is held in my body or reprogramming the subconscious beliefs or shifting things in the energetic signature. Like there's all those different layers to it. And ultimately, at the end of the day, which I think is where a lot of people get hung up, and I speak to this so often, but it goes so much further than that, is like it's one thing to have awareness, and that's I think the first step is like to become aware of these things, but awareness itself isn't enough because there are these different ways that we're holding it. So um actually being able to move through it is where like the freedom comes.
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. So we gain the awareness, and then the next time our parents trigger us,
Mhm.
because they do it constantly, um, we once again contract, we feel it happening, we understand that it's happening. But if we don't have the tools to make our body understand that we are safe in that moment, and we don't have to step in as a savior for our parents, and we don't have to, choose sides with our, like if you were a product of divorce, like you don't have to choose sides. Like in that moment that your mom is complaining or your dad is complaining, like you are safe to move through this. If you don't have those tools embedded in your internal toolkit,
Mhm.
you continue to spiral and spiral and spiral. And that's where the tension comes up.
Mhm.
And one of the things that's, I think right now, boomers are very itchy. They understand that something is not right. They
Mhm.
understand that the world that we're living in is like they created capitalism and we are end stage capitalism. Like
I
the
think a
world is
lot of
changing.
Yeah, I think a lot of boomers are actually starting to wake up, like considering they've been living in a box for a very long time and just like
Yeah.
following what the system has told them to do. I think so many are starting to finally like look around and go, like something about this actually isn't right. And I feel like 10 years ago they were projecting it on the millennials and saying like, well, your kid, like kids in your generation are lazy and this is the reason why the world is falling apart and like no work ethic, blah, blah, blah. They were blaming it all on this, which is a product of them and their creation. But like instead of looking at the systems,
Mhm.
whereas now I feel like thankfully part of the craziness is that it's getting louder and louder and they're being forced to look at some of the systems and realize like they've been duped by following what they were following. And
Mhm.
I don't know how many like, and that's not even the focus of this talk. I don't know how many boomers are like taking action to like fight the system necessarily, but I do feel like they're starting to realize that the system itself is flawed, which is obviously positive.
Yeah, they have the most experience, they have the most wisdom,
Mm,
and expertise in their field, and I know that the ones that are starting to wake up are definitely doing more to fight the system,
mm,
and awaken others than those who are really stuck in that survival mode, in that root chakra
yeah.
ancestral trauma that we talked about earlier. So much of them are still stuck there, and unfortunately that comes from doing the work. Like
Mm,
you have to settle the fire in order to, have the phoenix rise from the ashes. But
yeah.
um yeah, and then, Gen Z is sitting over here like, okay, boomer,
Mhm,
and they're just bucking the whole system from the start. Like they don't even want to go to college anymore. They all want to
mhm,
have, independent gigs where they're just not buying into college, they're not buying into corporate, they're not
mhm.
buying into selling their soul for a biweekly paycheck for 40 years to then get to enjoy travel for a few years until they become sick and die.
Yeah.
They're like, no, that's not how I want to do life. And why do you want to do it that way? Then we find ourselves in like these silos of like a misunderstanding between generations, instead of being open and aware and mindful of the fact that each generation has a gift that they bring.
Mhm.
And we do have to figure out what Gen X's gift is. I'm kidding, because it's like the forgotten generation. Um,
Wait, who's Gen X?
oh no, girl, it's the one in between boomers and millennials.
Oh,
So my husband is Gen X. It's like
okay.
1960 to like 1980.
I see. I didn't even know what boomers are. I just like I just every time you're like talking about the boomers, I just start cracking up.
I was like, okay, boomer. Actually, today I found out that boomer is the name of a male kangaroo.
Oh,
That makes it more fun.
Yeah, it does.
Uh, but like, yeah, we lack the understanding that, boomers are so far experienced in their fields. They've really gone deep for the past 40 plus years in knowledge and in wisdom, and we can really gain a lot from them. And
Mhm.
then, you know, Gen Z is so playful. And I was mentioning to you earlier, going to Tulum as a 40-year-old with three 25-year-old, 25, 26, 27 year olds
Mhm.
was so healing because it was so playful. And I don't do that.
Mhm.
If I'm supposed to set up time to play with my children, like, it's like one, it's planned. Like mommy has to do this, this, and this first, and then I can play.
Yeah.
Two, it's them telling me how to play because that's how kids are. They're like, no, I'm that Barbie. And no, you don't know, we're not going to the beach with the Barbies. Like it's like very,
Mhm.
very much in their brain, their imagination. So to
Yeah.
be with like 25-year-olds and like to feel the medicine of play flow through the group was so metamorphic.
Mhm.
And we forget that. We forget the gifts that each generation offers. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah.
Yeah, which kind of tying it back around, like one of the things too of how I think for a lot of millennials, although any generation will relate to this, but because so many of us kind of had some of that innocence and purity taken from our childhood, and because the parents were maybe like a lot of intergenerational trauma, a lot of lack of stability, security, etc., unable to regulate their own emotions or to understand what's going on and create I feel like there's a lot of codependency which got put on the children very often, where the child became like the therapist or the best friend or the validator, instead of like, no, this is just a child, like let the kid be a kid and like let them play and be in their innocence. um but I feel like so much of that has rippled down over the years, and it's such a process of reclaiming that and connecting back to that. And I know for me, which makes sense and ties in even to my text message to you, which was about how I felt like my root chakra was like very stabilized. I felt very grounded. I have tons of sacral energy, and like the creativity flowing through me is not an issue. But I realized like it was my solar plexus. And I said to you, um like which chakra is most related to confidence, because I have no problem creating and like putting things into the world and sharing them, but I had the realization that I have this underlying belief that it's not good enough and that it doesn't matter, so I'll create and create and create and I'll do and I'll do and I'll do,
Yeah.
but there's this like emptiness or this expectation that it's not going to be
Mhm.
received or enough or seen or anything. And it's kind of that for me this week has been very much about, okay, I've got the stability and the grounding. I've done so much work to feel safe in my body. And now it is about reconnecting to that inner child and like giving her the confidence, giving her the validation, reminding her that like her authentic expression is actually good enough and that she can put it out there, instead of her thinking, oh, I need to play smaller and hide, or I need to be the therapist, or I need to prioritize all of you and your dramas, and like giving that space again.
Yeah. That is a core wound of the millennial generation. This
Mhm.
productivity is tied to your worthiness.
Mhm.
And it is extremely hard to break that down and have the ego death from that because we live in a world that was built on a
Mhm.
broken hustle, right?
Yeah.
So, as much as we want to say, like, I don't want my productivity to equate to my worthiness, even though that's how I was raised. And that's, I needed laziness was, a sign of disrespect to our parents. And, if we
Mhm.
weren't overachieving, then obviously we were lazy. Like
Yeah.
no good.
Like,
And you don't want to be like, that uncle that,
yeah, like
you know,
the lazy person, or the failure
The
in terms
failure.
of
Yeah.
like it's going to equate to nothing. Like
Yeah.
if you're not being productive and putting that into something, you're going to be the the dropout who has the minimum wage job, who can't afford anything they want, who's going to die alone, who's
Mhm.
not really contributing to society. Like the image,
Loser. The
the
loser.
loser, yeah, the
Yeah.
image that was projected on the
Yeah.
lack of productivity or being lazy, is wild.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
And like, why did they do that? Like thinking about how they were raised, their parents were born in the Great Depression era.
Hmm.
And, they were raised very frugally. And mostly blue collar because let's face it, like corporate jobs were the industrialists hadn't really even developed corporate jobs at that point. It was very far in between in like the 40s.
Hmm.
And so when they were coming up, like they were witnessing their parents be blue collar, their mom was home, their dad was working very hard. And as we started to get into, hard men make easy time or strong men make easy times and easy times make weak men or whatever that quote
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
Um, they came out of the depression and then we came into this era where people wanted to be more free and they wanted to be more expressed. And and I think our parents realized in those moments that like you could go down a really wrong path here and you could be setting yourself up if you're not keeping up with, you know, good grades, good education, good job
Hmm.
potentials. And if that happens to you, I'm not raising you a second time because I already gave up my youth to raise you the first time,
Yeah.
you
How
know?
much of that do you feel is tied into also, what popped in for me as I was listening to that is like the insecurities and lack of self-worth that the parents had
Mm-hmm.
because of their wounded childhood and like and everything that was passed down to them. But then it created also the keeping up with the Joneses
Yeah.
of like, this is going to validate me. And so the best grades, the best, school, the best this thing, all these external markers of
Yeah.
success
Yeah.
became their priority because it almost was that false sense of their self-worth through their
Mm-hmm.
children.
Oh my gosh. And we would like walk in on our parents having phone calls bragging about us. Like our achievements made them worthy parents.
Yeah.
And that just kind of stuck with us. Like we needed to like constantly have things for our parents to brag about next.
Yeah. It's like if you haven't done something good enough, then like what are you?
What are you even?
What are
You're
you
not
even?
worth talking about on the phone.
Yeah, yeah, like and then yeah, it's in yeah, very interesting.
Wow.
Mhm.
Um yeah, we end up like needing to fulfill these uh, unachievable or invisible contracts because they brought that into our childhood.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I had a beautiful talk with my mom because we've struggled. We have like such positive relationship in a lot of ways, but as with any relationship, we've also struggled and had like a lot of layers of programming and things because this is my life's work. I'm hyper aware of what stems from where and how it impacted me. But we had a beautiful conversation just about these different things that were passed down or how, and she even acknowledged that because of her own insecurities, and she was just so happy to be a mother for Derek and I, but then didn't feel worthy because of all of her layers of things and my parents' relationship. And she was in the generation where it was kind of that middle gap between women staying at home were actually starting to be looked down upon as
Mhm.
like the housewife mother who's like, what are you even contributing? Like the whole narrative where they started to downplay the motherhood. And so a lot of my friends' moms were working, and my mom always felt like she was lesser than, when in reality, actually, it's like this was the greatest blessing that she was around and able to be so involved. But there were just all these pieces, and even, she was saying to me of how because her mom had been so uninvolved, she tried to do the opposite of
Mhm.
like, I want to be there and be there to support my children, but it became over involved. And to me, then created a lot of like codependency and um, feeling like I didn't necessarily have the freedom because she was always there. And Derek
Mhm.
was just like, he's a guy, so he could do his thing. Whereas like the mummy and the little girl had that extra where a lot of things got put on me that shouldn't have been, but I was there, right?
Yeah.
And it was a very healing conversation and being able to acknowledge and help me release like some of the frustration that I've definitely held towards her for it because
Mhm.
and like I'm very much I just appreciate when people acknowledge it. Like I don't want to hold it against you because I know we're all doing the best with what we know, but it
Mhm.
was nice to have her just acknowledge that like yeah, there were some things that in hindsight, had she known better, like she would have handled them differently. And then I could go, ah, and like I could understand why she was doing it and why she thought it was like the better
Mhm.
way to show her love. Whereas meanwhile, I was like, oh, I kind of needed something else that wasn't there, right?
Yeah. Oh, befriending your children is
Mhm.
like the core of that.
Yeah.
And what year was your mom born?
I think both my parents were 59.
Yeah, they're like right on that like X cusp, and like
Yeah.
X Gen X did that. Um they
Yeah, they wanted
befriended their
like my
children.
dad wanted to be the cool
Yeah,
parent, right? Like the
yeah.
best friend, and that created a lot of problems, and especially not having like a strong father figure for my brother like led to a lot of things. But yeah, like the desire to be, and then my mom had to become hyper parenting because my dad really wasn't parenting. So then she's more in her masculine too. And then we didn't always necessarily feel the nurturing feminine from her as much as she probably even wanted to give it. Like it's crazy. It's crazy when you look at it from the outside perspective and see the domino effect because it really is like just one tiny thing here or the one parent becoming the best friend and then how that affects down or yeah the one who instead of going to a therapist uses their child as their therapy person, right? And like how that it's just all these little pieces that play out.
Yeah, and then here you are 30 years later,
Yeah.
or me 40 years later, digging out from the shit of um like a world that was too advanced for us to process in that moment.
Hmm.
And it really does rob you of your innocence. And then, we have a generation of millennials and yeah, mostly millennials who are like inner child healing. We need to do inner child healing. And it's like become a buzzword now.
Hmm. Yeah.
You have a lot of, you know, unhealed or wounded millennials who, hear that word and they cringe. I think it's like a crock. But
Yeah.
um, for the most part, we really do need to allow ourselves to have those moments of like innocence and childhood that were robbed from us. And they're so healing.
Yeah.
Working through one inner child healing, and I know you have like recordings for this, or your packaged activations,
Mhm.
um, can alleviate so much stress from your system and so much mental anguish because you realize in those moments of what your inner soul feels to be fully untethered and free and
Yeah.
allowed to explore their imagination and that pure container of joy and um, that energy of just like no responsibility. And you
Yeah.
get to see in those moments like the wisdom that your soul carries and what you're here to do.
Yeah.
Because when you layer on all of the anxiety of what our parents instilled in us, and all of the programming of your worthiness is attached to your productivity levels. It just weighs us down too much to float in that freedom. And
Mm,
so, like, if you, as a listener, have heard the term inner child and just set it to the side,
mhm,
I the invitation now is to soften your heart around inner child healing because of the magic that it brings. And if you had a moment to hang out with like a free Gen Zer, you would see that
mhm,
it's so imperative to heal that in your own self.
mhm. Yeah, just the ability, like, I've been leaning into that more and more the last few months. And again, I think for a lot of people, the struggle is they don't have the stability, and because of the amount of security issues with money, with like the root chakra, with all the chaos in the world and all the trauma that's designed to keep us feeling unstable, you don't even have the ability to get to the inner child yet. So like I do feel like it's kind of a process, but for me, I've noticed because I have a lot of those other things feeling like stable and grounded and supported, that then it's like, okay, now I can begin to bring the attention back to that inner child energy and the playfulness. And like the last few months, I've been like making forts. I'm like so happy. And I just like got my little galaxy light and I'm hiding out and painting or like coloring. And oh my gosh, even yesterday it was like a heavy release day of tons of like heart chakra and grief and like layers coming up, which again, when we create space, it can come up. But if we're super busy or always going or stuck in the hustle and grind, then it just stays inside you and can't come to the surface. So I had a very like open calendar day yesterday. And so like lots started to come up. And I just like laid in bed and like, curled up in like the fetal position. And I was like crying and moving through things and but it was like the most beautiful cathartic, like let me sit and nurture myself and comfort myself in what I'm going through. Let me release and honor these things. Felt like my brother connect, my dog, all my all my best friends were there from like the multi-dimensional. And
Mhm.
I was just like, ah, and I felt so held by the creator. And I was just like, it's like it's just giving yourself the space to like be feeling what you're feeling or be imagining what you're imagining and not judging it and not needing it to look a certain way or not telling myself I have to go work because I told myself I was going to film a video every day. So like I have to go do it and bringing in that toxic force. Like, and I'm very aware it's a luxury that I have the lifestyle and ability to do that. It's also like a conscious creation because I wanted to give myself that space and prioritize, but like really just giving our inner child what we need or giving ourselves that level of self-love of like you're worthy to be seen and
Mhm.
there's nothing wrong that you're feeling this way or that you're sad that, these things happened, or just to acknowledge that, like, I think probably every single human being, no matter what culture, no matter where you grew up, no matter what age range, we all were forced to grow up too quickly because of some kind of layer of trauma or the belief systems of the generation before us. The constant innocence has been stripped away by the
Mhm.
systems on this planet, and it's such a gift to bring that back.
Yeah. And I know as I raise my own kids, that is like a huge imperative of mine is to preserve their innocence.
Mm,
And I was telling you beforehand, like I'm not, I have I'm blessed enough to be in a very loving relationship with my husband. And I understand that there are people out there that are in, tumultuous or abusive relationships with children. So this doesn't necessarily apply, but it can. Just know that it can apply to you. Um, we don't argue and we don't have conflict around our children. Um, it's one of those things where we're both mature enough to understand that we can have our needs met. We can talk about these boundaries when they're removed from a situation, when they're asleep. We don't need to bring them into the environment where they need to be aware of adult relationship and adult conflict.
Mm-hmm.
They're not even 10 and not even 7. Um, they just need to be worried about the fact that all their needs are met. They
Mm-hmm.
have the ability to be creative when they want to be creative and play sports when they want to play sports and have friends and just kind of be free. Um, so we, we're very conscious about that. We also don't triangulate each other, which is
Mm-hmm.
a huge thing that our parents did. So,
Yeah.
if I was feeling moody about my husband, I wouldn't say around my kids, like I wouldn't feel like they had to choose between
Yeah.
um my love in that moment if they didn't agree with my thought about their
Yeah.
father.
I feel like
Um,
that was big in that generation. Like I had that a lot of being pitted against one another and that feeling of if I don't agree with you and
I lose
validate
love.
your wound, then I lose love and I might lose potential future love. So then I have to kind of go here instead of like, let me just love you both for whatever reasons and because you're my parents. Like, and
Yeah.
you two figure your shit out. Like that's on you. But like
Yeah.
let me just be over here with my imaginary friends.
Yeah. And I think that people discount children and what they can feel and what they can perceive.
Mm.
And, my mom is famous for this, and I have called her out on it. She's a Gemini, and
Oh,
she
so
puts
is
up
my mom.
no, she puts up ice walls,
Mm.
and I call it icing out.
Mm.
So like when you walk into a room as an empath or somebody who's attuned to energy, you can feel if you need to walk on eggshells, like you just feel that, like, oh, something is going on in here. My mom will like strategically direct that at
Mm.
you. It's not like a overarching energy of like anxiety in the room. It is like a targeted like
Mm.
ice wall in front of
Mm.
you. Like she's nice to my children, she's nice to my husband, and she's icing me out specifically because of something I said to her. I called her out on her own shit. I
Yeah.
constantly do that. She like yells at me. She's like, "Stop making me feel like I always need to like be in therapy." I'm just bringing it into your awareness, in,
Mm.
in a soft spoken way. Like I'm not like you did that. Like I would never do that. Like that's not who
Yeah.
I am.
Yeah. But you're
I'm
like,
like,
hey,
hey,
this
this
is
is a pattern that I'm noticing. Let's dig into this. And she's like, like I swallow, and I
yeah.
can feel it. And children can feel it. Children can feel your energy. They can feel if you're mad. Dogs can, like
Yeah.
just because you don't understand what you're doing with your energy field doesn't mean that other people are not perceptive of it. And
Mhm.
so understanding that like your energy speaks for you minutes before your mouth opens.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that awareness of, yeah, the energetic sensitivity and the emotional piece of like the thing that you're processing behind, like that you think you're processing internally. But if there's other people around, especially, yeah, those who are sensitive and in tune or children, like they are picking up on it. And you think of as kids, we do typically take that on then and feel like it is directed at us
Mm.
because we don't know any different. And like, yeah, there is just that parent-child connection.
Or you feel that energy and you're like, okay, I have to be a good girl or I'm going to get yelled at or the love is going to get taken away from me. And then you have these good girl complexes.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my
Yeah.
God. Which is like part of the programming we've been talking about too
Mhm.
this week, you and I, of just that's been there's been so many layers to my healing and it's all divine timing, but that has been a huge block of the fullness of my self-expression because it's that whole your authentic self-expression is going to either give you love or take away your love. And if you're not saying the things I want you to say, or if you're not agreeing with my narrative or fitting in the box that I want you to fit in so that I can brag about you to my friends on the phone and talk about your celebrations or like whatever it is, then we feel like we're not safe to fully be that. And it reverts into that let me like let me just be the good girl. Let me just make sure I'm not rocking the boat. I already feel like I'm walking on eggshells because I'm picking up all your energy. So now I need to make sure I'm not adding to that. Or I even think about it for young boys and like for my brother of I know he was picking up on a lot of different stresses and conflict between my parents. And yeah, then you're like, I need to be the savior or I need to protect. And this whole, again, seriousness and early maturation instead of being the child who like isn't concerned about those things. Um, but that design that then takes us into I need to shift who I am to appease the authority, or I won't be loved, or I won't be validated, or I won't be safe,
Mhm.
which, as we see on like the global scale with systems and everything, again, it goes even bigger with just conforming and the like not speaking up about what's true, not standing in integrity because
Mhm.
we're afraid someone might pull their love or their energy from us.
Yep. And that played out in like a full circle for you this week. Just like that good girl energy. You you said you were going to do something
Mm-hmm.
and then you were deviating from that.
Mm-hmm.
And the deviation was through a process of growth and also like an energetic attunement to the new energy that you were bringing in. So like it didn't matter what words you spoke,
Mm-hmm.
a few weeks later, new energy was flowing in to take you into new heights. And I called you out on it. I said, your Taurus loyalty is not serving you right now. Like you're such a loyal Taurus and you're
Mm-hmm.
loyal because you said you were going to do something. So you're going to do it. And that
Yeah.
literal sense of like, if I don't do it, my word is not good. If my word is not good, I don't deserve the love and I'm not a good girl, good
Yeah.
person
Yeah.
has nothing to do with that. It has to do with growth and evolution and like making space for like a beautiful development
Mm-hmm.
that's coming your way.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that like you can see that full circle in your healing of your inner child there.
Mm. Yeah, that's so true. It's like it was 100% that if I don't honor my word and I go back against this to express myself more fully and more authentically in this new way, um, that I'm going to lose everyone, or everyone's going to be sitting there with that magnifying glass and judging and saying, like, well, this is, she said last week she was going to do this thing and now she's not. And like, yeah, definitely good girl programming wanting to but then it's contracting even more of like well I guess I should not honor what I truly feel now from this new shift in energy and like not honor taking action on that and I'll contract because I said this thing and I have to fit into the box to make other people happy and trust me.
Mm, yeah. I will like let some of my shapeshifter energy come off onto you. And you can feel free to just
Yeah.
move with what the moon cycle. Like, every other day, I'm like, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna be this person. I'm gonna be that person.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
no risk of how wishy-washy I'm perceived or unloyal to what I said, or breaking
Yeah.
commitments or whatever. I'm committed in the things that are important.
Yeah, definitely. That's just another piece of my own programming, good girl stuff aside, of like I've always jumped and pivoted
Mhm.
and been like so passionate and lit up about something and I'll go after it. And then it was always kind of that underlying joke of like, oh, what's Kara doing now? Where is Kara
Mhm.
going? Like I changed universities a bunch of times and then traveling the world and then people like well, what's she up to these days? And like, is she gonna stay there? Is that actually gonna last? So I think it's probably also this underlying complex because I don't feel like people trust
Hmm.
my word, but maybe that's because I haven't trusted my word because of underlying things too. I don't know.
I think also the people that were proclaiming those judgments were
Mm.
operating out of alignment.
Yeah, true.
Just because
Yeah.
corporate works for you doesn't mean it works for everybody. Just because staying at university works for you doesn't mean it works for everybody.
Yeah, yeah. Or
Yeah.
just because you're happy to
Mhm.
stay in the same thing for 40 years, complain
Mhm.
about it. And I'm like, I don't want to complain about it. I'll change.
Yeah. You, at the
I'll,
depths of your beingness, understood you were here for a different purpose, bigger
yeah.
purpose.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
Ooh, programming.
Programming. Yeah. So we talked about human design, like our first time we talked with me being a
Mm,
reflector and you being a projector. And I think like when you realize what your design is and you realize what your kids' designs are,
mhm,
which you can do on a free app, it's like so easy.
mhm,
The beautiful thing about raising that next generation is the awareness of how their beingness absorbs programming and how you can avoid programming them with your, you know,
mhm,
shortcomings or ancestral shit that you haven't worked through or whatever it is. So my son is a manifester. They are like an initiatory energy. They have a resistant aura. They don't take your opinion at all. Like
mhm,
they are here to do what they want to do. They reject authority. Um, and what lights them up is like them being in that their own energy to create and innovate. And my daughter is a generator and it's a sacral, like hell yes energy that she's supposed to follow. And so when you talk to, and she's just like happy go lucky, very easy to raise, but I could also squash her bigness. I could
mhm.
be like, you're too loud, you're too much, you're like,
Yeah.
you know, you just running off and doing your own thing as an independent girl is not following my predictive programming of like, I need to keep you safe and like no, I have created a safety net around my children with the community they live in, the people that they interact with, and all of that. So my children are safe fundamentally. I understand that and I'm aware of that, and I can release the control of having to like keep them in check and let them kind of just flow into the energy of what lights them up or drives them forward. And I know like manifester, especially manifester boys. Oh my gosh, if any of your listeners have a manifester son, it is probably the most difficult assignment. These men can grow up to they struggle with authority, and a lot of them, if you try to put the reins on them, will end up with like a police rap sheet because
Mhm,
they have no desire to fit in. They don't care how you do things. They're
mhm.
going to do things how it makes sense for them, and they're going to push the envelope and they're going to change the world.
Yeah.
So like my son is like always in trouble at school, but it's for like stupid things, like really stupid things. And
Mhm.
every time the principal calls me, I call the principal out on it. I'm like, I am sorry. Do you not have anything better to be calling me about than your son had an iPad dropped on his foot and he kicked it away? And the person who dropped it shoved him, but he didn't do anything back. He just, he behaved.
Mhm.
Why are you calling me? Why are you wasting my time to tell me this? Like,
Yeah.
so like they just like they have their eyes on him and they're trying to take him down like every chance that they get.
Mhm,
And it really does feel like a minor persecution. And I really don't want him in the education system. I really do want to move to Costa Rica and put them in a jungle school and like have
mhm,
them just be feral and all of that. But it's not in the cards at the moment.
mhm,
Um, but anyway, it's like raising your children to have the gifts that their energy brings instead of the failures that you didn't achieve and the desires that you would want them to have because your desires are not their desires and the
mhm,
way you grew up is not the way that they're growing up. Times have changed and everything is different and they're here to with a specific timestamp
mhm.
of energy. going forward for change. It
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily start when your time frame started. It starts like 20 years later, right? So like understanding that we're all here for a reason
Mhm.
and we need to like encourage our children to not be afraid of who they are and to grow into it.
Yeah. Encourage our children and encourage ourselves for those of us who don't have children. Like it really is about the shift from unconscious living, just in the loop in the program, to consciously living by your design. And it doesn't even have to be by human design, although I'm so glad you brought that up. But like conscious living by what is your unique soul's blueprint, and like what does feel best for you. And even tying into what we just said for me about the good girl programming, like being able to discern, oh, am I actually like closing myself off from acting fully authentically expressed because there's this layer of programming or this fear or this childhood thing, or like what would the most free version of me want to do for her, because this is like the most true for her and for what she's here to do, regardless of parents, family, like society, friends, and running with that. And it's like that sovereignty, that liberation, but also just that honoring of like we all are different and we all have different ways of seeing the world and showing up. And some of us are more like staying in line, and that's part of how we are. Some are maybe like pushing the buttons and like the shit disturbers, and that's how they're making the changes to help trigger offshoots. And it's that whole, I think, getting out of the parenting where it's like the one right way, where they just were always like, fit in this box, this is the way you do it. And now, thankfully, as more and more people and just like the planetary shifts in general to this multidimensionality, it's like, oh yeah, there's literally quantum, like infinite quantum possibilities of how things can play out and who each person is here to be. And it's very much about just like following that path of least resistance and path of soul alignment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like imagine if you were parented from a conscious parent who understood like exactly what you didn't need in your field and purposefully kept that shit out of your field so that
Yeah.
you could fully develop into who you were meant to be. Like, I know you had your awakening really early and you've been working in your expertise for a decade already. But imagine if you didn't have to heal your own shit because you didn't have shit to heal. Like, imagine where you would be.
Yeah.
Imagine where our children can be if we just allow them to be who their spirit is
Hmm.
instead of like forcing or taking them out of their sovereignty. And
Hmm.
another thing that I wanted to speak on was um like vision board planning or like soul alignment planning after a really beautiful inner child healing where you're feeling that most free. That
Hmm.
would be like really magnetic and powerful.
Yeah, I love that. You'd
Hmm.
be so open. It's kind of like, it's like they always say with children how they're so connected to source because like they are still so pure and in that open channel before more and more layers of trauma or programming get put on them. And when we connect back into that now, even as adults, and like get into that space, yeah, like the beauty of what unfolds with all of
Yeah.
it. Hmm.
Yeah. Like what you were most passionate about as a child is a really important aspect of your soul's work here.
Yeah, I've been like leaning into that more, even with like the singing and then the writing and all these different things. And um, to the human design part, I'm still torn because like I identified so strongly with being a projector, but then by the true sidereal astrology, I'm actually a 6'2" Manny gen, and so much of my gene keys and chart with that resonates a lot. And I know, again, we're multidimensional, so we can find aspects from everything, but I feel a lot of my connection to the projector was actually like a trauma bond, and like a lot of the wounds and the ways that projectors don't feel seen or heard was just programming from my mom. And it was just like her wounds that I adopted, because I look at the confidence I feel to like start expressing and like uploading videos, singing. I don't, part of it's because of all the work I've done, but it just feels so aligned and true. And I don't feel fear or anything around it. And when I look at the multi-passionate, the pivoting, the like gut instinct, that's more manifesting generator.
Mhm.
There's a lot of things where I can see how so much of my life up until this point had still been very much by different layers of the program. Um, and also just self-discovery and like trial and error, figuring things out, and then being able to see, okay, where am I meant to go? Um, but yeah, back to your point about like, had we been brought up with the parents who were like just very tuned in to like, what are your needs? And like what, and like seeing, oh, this is something that they're clearly passionate about or they're very gifted in, like let's pursue that. And for me, I got thrown in sports because both my parents were really high level university basketball players. I remember all my aunts and uncles, family, friends, everyone was always like, "Oh, Kara, like, are you gonna do this?" And I was just like,
Maybe.
like, I guess, like, if that's what's expected of me, I guess that's what I'll do. But meanwhile, like music and imagination, singing, creativity, like I was playing in the quantum all the time, really, like the things that I'm so connected to now were more of like the deeper passions, but I didn't have the sovereignty and I didn't have the empowerment to like say that. I didn't feel like I had the authority as a kid to say like, "Oh, I like this actually." Like, no, I
Yeah.
don't enjoy doing this thing. And um I was like 16 playing all the competitive sports, but competitive soccer specifically. And we were going into the playoffs, into the final. And I remember like crying all the time and in the shower, just hoping I would slip and break my leg because it was like, I don't want to play. I feel so much pressure. And the only way I can get out of this is if I hurt myself, was kind of the belief system I had because I didn't know how to speak up for
Yeah.
myself or
Yeah.
um and when the season finished, I remember telling that to my parents had just split, I think, but telling it to both of them separately and my dad just like crying. It was the first or second time he had like cried in front of me and he was just so sad because they had thought all these years that I enjoyed sports
Mm.
and enjoyed being on the competitive teams. I just liked making the competitive teams because I thought it made me special and we got nice clothes. So I could
Yeah.
like wear the track jacket to school and feel like I was, somebody because otherwise I felt so unseen. But I remember how like how much it hurt them to know like how anxious and like how inside I was so like in so much turmoil. But I had never been empowered to speak up, and neither of them were modeling because
Mhm.
neither of them really healthy communicated in healthy ways or honored their voice or so again it's just so interesting to see the layers of it and the ways that misaligned parents and their maybe shadows or their unhealed wounds that then they might not even be putting it on us, but we just observe it in them. And then we think, oh, this is how I am. Like, I think my dad was very much the people pleaser, nice guy programming. And so that was like, again, don't really rock the boat. My
Yeah.
mom was more the potential ice wall and kind of walk on eggshells because you don't want to add to her stress or frustration. So it's just like all these things that compile into this human version of the source avatar that we've incarnated in. And then you're like, actually, absolutely none of this is me. None of this,
Yeah. And
none
then
of this
it's
is
when
my
you
truth.
go when you go into your healing, it's like ego death, ego death, ego death.
Yeah,
You're
exactly.
like, who am I?
Yeah. You're like, I'm actually none of these things that I've
Yeah.
lived my whole life, which
Hmm.
again is so empowering though.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and healing.
Right. But imagine if we didn't have to go through all that pain to figure out who we were. And we were just, it was like cultivated in us from the start.
Yeah. And that's what I pray for like the future generations. And like, that's why even with my healing, I'm like, if I have babies someday, I really hope, or I don't even hope, I know that like the layers that I've released are going to
Yeah.
help them have less layers. And not to say that I'll be perfect by any means, because that's not possible,
Hmm.
but just knowing that hopefully they come in and then have less conditions to have to heal through. And
Yeah.
and every generation it can keep getting better.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like we crossed the peak and now we get to come down. And I tease my kids about this all the time. I'm like, you are growing up in a time period where you literally have the softest childhood of any of us. And I gave them 100-year history of their lineage. My
Wow.
my husband's mom immigrated from Korea during the Korean War, like was sold from by her family
Oh my
at a
God.
very young age. All of that is inside of them. And
Yeah.
then when they came here, um, the parents split when my husband was like 3 months old, and she was left as an immigrant of five, barely speaking English with, you know,
Five
with
babies.
five kids to take care of. And when he was in grade school, his guidance counselor kind of understood that they were very poor. Um, and he would buy them new backpacks, and he would, give them
Mm,
money for lunch and snacks, and make sure that they had everything that they needed. And that man, because he was more of a constant figure in my husband's life, is who my husband calls dad. And he was a black man that never married. My
yeah.
husband, his dad is Irish,
Yeah.
his mom's Korean, and this black man who never married and never had kids, but just loved children and wanted him to have everything that he never had. Um,
Yeah. He's like a stand-in.
yeah, he was like a stand-in, and he like paid for all of my husband's college applications and helped him like raise money to start his business. And he wouldn't be where he is because of, unless, for Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, like when we think about talking to our kids about Black history in America,
Mm.
it's really important for Lewis's legacy to continue on with my children, and then my brother-in-law and my nephew's father on the other side. They're Black in America, and so like continuing on the legacy of like how Lewis grew up.
Mm-hmm.
And I was sharing that with them, and then I said, yeah, like this was when my mom was born. Brian's dad was
Mm-hmm.
still in segregated classrooms in America and
Yeah.
being persecuted because of the color of his skin. And you know how smart Grandpa Reddy was. And they were like, yeah. And I'm like, and now here we are, fast forward 70 years. And the only thing you have to worry about is some idiot on Fortnite making fun of you or killing you, and you lose your whole cache of like
Mm-hmm.
gems and stuff. And like, are we serious? You have
Yeah.
the softest childhood. And
Mm-hmm.
and you should see that, because like it's important for you to understand what is not affecting you anymore.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think like we did a lot of work. Like my husband and I have done a lot of work to not bring our parents' shit into our house.
Yeah.
And our grandparents' shit, but
Yeah. It's
they do have the chance to have a very soft Gen Alpha, have a very soft childhood.
yeah. The contrast and like being aware of that. And Um, Again, I was texting my mom this morning, and in my healing yesterday, I was like able to see all the gratitude though, because I really was so fortunate in so many ways as well. And your story that made me laugh because it totally made me think of like my dad or that generation where they'd be like, we used to walk we used to walk to school
Uphill
uphill both ways, and
in
you're
the snow.
in the snow, an hour each direction by myself. And you're like, and like it was always their way of trying to show not nearly as eloquent as you've just explained the contrast of like, look at where previous generations
Mhm.
were compared to like the gifts and the luxuries you have. Um, but it is very true, like when we look at that scale, and that's where I think again, it's beautiful to see that and to honor that because each generation has made strides
Mhm.
and has shifted. I think again, it's just the understanding of like how we have the potential to keep moving it forward. Um, yeah, because like I feel so much compassion when I think about my parents' upbringings and like the things that they went through and that were normalized for them or what they would have seen at school. And yeah, and then when you bring in like skin color or different other things or culture or new immigrants, like yeah, just the
Yeah.
way that it would have influenced everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And the trauma that gets carried on from that.
Mm.
On a lighter note, I will say I live in a neighborhood where there is a very prominent downhill, but in order to get to the downhill, you have to go uphill. And so I can see how your dad would say he had to walk uphill in both directions because, like, I would have to walk uphill to walk downhill and then uphill to walk downhill.
Yeah. Oh
Maybe
my
they
gosh.
weren't entirely wrong, but it was exaggeratory.
Yeah, it was so exaggerated. I was always like, okay, come on.
Yeah.
Yeah, but well, this has been a beautiful discussion of like very many layers of childhood programming, healing, family stuff. And I think, um, again, I'm always grateful for our conversations and like the healing for me, hopefully for both of us as we're talking through it. But um, I love about this one that, we had our idea of kind of touching on the different generations, but it really is more from like a place of understanding and like it's not about judging or blaming because every generation is so unique in even what's going on in the world at that time, let alone in the family dynamic. But um it's really like being able to understand and be compassionate and empathize, but then also know like I don't want to perpetuate these things, or just because these were normalized doesn't mean I want to repeat that. And so that constant reminder of like where can I be more conscious in giving myself healthier support or balance, and then also passing that on if I have children or if I do in the future, if you currently do. Yeah, like bringing that with you.
Yeah. And I think taking the opportunity to do some inner child healing
Mm,
and do some journaling on some of the things that we talked about today and finding your relation to like any overarching themes that we discussed.
mm,
When you gain that awareness, that is the first step. The second step is then going deep into the subconscious and trying to build your toolkit of ways that you cannot be triggered
mm,
by these gaps in generational support or maturity, whatever we want to call it.
mm.
Um, and obviously not seeing yourself as like the superior generation. That's another thing too. Like
Yeah,
we're like, okay, boomer, or lazy Gen Z, like we assign a level of superiority to our own.
yeah,
And that's ageist. That's ageism
yeah,
right there. But
yeah,
there's
definitely.
medicine throughout it. I think you should include some inner healing work below. We can include how to find your kids' human
Yeah,
design if you're interested, a link for that.
Yeah, definitely we'll
Yeah.
drop that down. And I was just gonna say that, yeah, I'm gonna do a shameless plug of like I've just finished my inner child quantum healing hypnosis. I've just finished the setup for a free one. So I'll put the link for the free healing too, because it really has been so powerful. And I just love that every time we uncover a new piece and just like giving ourselves more love and more compassion and
Yeah.
yeah, so we'll drop a bunch of different resources down below.
Yeah. And it's multifaceted. It's like an onion. When you
Mm,
do the inner child healing, the first time you do it, you might do like a very prominent healing from your childhood. But, each time you re-listen to that, you're going to have a different experience. It's not a one and
mm,
done.
yeah,
Um,
no, not at all.
Not at all.
Like, let's keep going. Let's
Let's keep
just like
going.
see all of
Yeah.
it. Yeah,
And
yeah,
I love it. I'm excited to listen.
yeah. Well, thank you for being here again, Tiffany.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And thank you to everyone for listening. Again, I should have mentioned at the beginning, but please let us know what you resonated with and thoughts you had as you listened. And yeah, check out the pinned comment for all the different links and resources, as well as a way to stay in touch with Tiffany if you'd like to stay in her vortex. And we will see you again very soon.
Bye.